This week, I really needed to slow down a little and have a painting I could work on between all of our house renovations. Something pretty and relaxing that transports me to one of my favorite places in Scotland. And in this video, I want to share some tips with you for painting slightly more realistic. Although, as you know, I don't paint photorealistic or anything, it's very stylized still. And I like to combine a little bit of realism with a slightly fantastical or whimsical color palette, along with lots of stylized brushstrokes. So let's dive in. A lot of my students tell me that they struggle with gouache because they want to do a very detailed drawing, but then they get frustrated when they paint over it with an opaque paint and suddenly their beautiful drawing disappears and they lose their game plan, basically. And I totally get this. And it actually took me quite a long time to get used to this. And now I've transitioned into using a drawing more as a practice run. So I draw everything out very loosely. I don't put too much effort into making everything detailed. I usually simplify the shapes a lot. And mostly this is just a way to sort of parcel out the different shapes I'm going to be using, solidify my composition more or less, and again, give me a practice run or a warm up into the painting session. And I found over the years that trusting the process is the only way through this stage, knowing that I won't lose sight of my plan or my vision along the way, even if I layer the painting and lose the drawing completely. One way that you can get through this beginning stage is to give yourself big shapes to work within. Since my painting is going to have several zones, I have a sky, mountains, water, foreground flowers. I can draw those sections in, and then I fill in each of those areas with a base color. And this leads me into my next tip, which is with gouache in particular, because we are going to be layering quite a bit. This first layer can be very messy, and I like to really embrace the messiness and the abstract nature of this first layer because my style is kind of a bridge between realism and abstraction. I will often leave these abstract marks I make at the beginning peeking through here and there in the painting. And of course, over time, with lots of brush mileage, you can kind of nail your first layer and get it pretty much how you want it from the beginning of the painting and not have to go over it several times later. But that obviously comes with lots of practice. But I always approach it thinking I'm going to do at least 2 or 3 layers. If you give yourself that mental space, knowing you can come back and play with these abstract sections, it kind of frees you up a little bit. And again, it goes back to that thing where it doesn't have to be perfect the first time around. I think this is one of the biggest mental struggles people go through when they want to paint something realistic, but they have to go through this messy stage first to get there. Quick little editing break to let you know that there is 1 week left in my Kickstarter for launching my new art book. This is Sketching Scotland Volume 2. We are re-releasing the first volume as well with the second edition cover and my other book, Brush Mileage. So you can get all 3 as a bundle or just these 2. They're special pricing, and since we hit the funding goal and all of the stretch goals, there's also going to be free goodies in everybody's package. So if you're interested, jump into the link and after you watch the video, order yours today. In a landscape painting, I find it's just as important to know when and where to simplify things in order to make the detailed areas stand out. Oftentimes, I'm very much simplifying the background elements. In this case, it's the sky and these distant mountains. And the brushstrokes themselves are very loose, dry, lots of overlapping dry brush strokes. One of my favorite techniques with gouache. To achieve that, I let the brush dry out and my gouache slightly dry out so it's a little bit tacky. So when I pick up the gouache on the brush, it sits on the surface of the hairs, and then I can dust it over the surface of the paper or the layers that already exist on the paper. This definitely takes a lot of practice. It's one of the trickiest things, but once you start doing it, it's really hard to stop because it's so beautiful. All of the overlapping colors really come together in the end when you back up and see it as a whole. When I look at my reference photos, I will often squint so that everything is reduced to very simplified shapes and colors and values. This allows me to use my artistic judgment and make some choices about what I'm putting on the paper. If I squint my eyes and see a mass of dark green, I can use a single brushstroke to represent that in my painting. It might feel very strange at first, but once you do it a few times, you start to learn to trust that process. Another technique that goes hand in hand with the dry brush technique is to touch in several different colors within a few brush strokes of each other. So if I'm letting my brush dry out and the gouache kind of get tacky, I have to reload it very often, like every two brush strokes. Whenever I do that, I touch it into another color. Usually it's very similar, or I'm kind of dragging different color piles into each other to do this. So the color shifts are very subtle, but that really makes a difference because variety is key. The more you use large, flat areas of color in your painting, the less realistic it will be. It will look much more illustrative or cartoony, I guess. So if you want to get away from that idea or that style, use as much variety as you can. If you're painting a field of flowers, it's not going to be a single green or even two greens. It's probably going to be dozens of greens along with whatever color the flowers are. So this technique of having to reload my brush often kind of forces me to do that, or at least becomes kind of an intuitive process as I paint. We are now getting closer to the nitty-gritty details of this painting. All of the lovely overlapping flowers and growies in the foreground. I find it's much easier to start with a darker base color, and I still want to include quite a bit of variety in that dark mass, like variations of blues, greens, browns. Obviously, it depends on your exact scene that you're painting. But in order to paint the highlighted parts of the leaves and the flowers later, this is a good base to work on top of because it's really hard to come back in later to add all of these shadows. So what I'll do is typically load up my brush with a decent amount of gouache and a fair bit of water and just layer this in so it becomes all one connected mass. And while that's drying, I can work on little touches in other areas of the painting. One thing we want to do is make sure we have a dark lip on the underside of any areas that touch the water. So this little grassy island over in the river or the distant shoreline needs to have a little sliver of shadow. I also like to paint tiny slivers of stylized water movement. So I use the thinnest brush I can, the thinnest point, and I do little squiggly marks in the direction of the water flowing. It's just a personal thing, I think. I just like how it looks and it kind of adds a little movement to the water. When it comes to painting all of the overlapping leaves and flowers and everything, there's a few different approaches you could take, but what I like to do is start with sort of a mid-green, like a mid-tone, not too bright, not too saturated, something slightly muted but still green. And I'll start with simple grassy marks. I kind of flick my brush with the point down. And most importantly, I try to keep my marks as random as possible because the last thing I want to do is create a noticeable pattern, like tons of vertical brush strokes that are evenly spaced apart. That will be very distracting. More than half of my footage is taken up by all of the final details in the painting because it's a very tedious process. I'm sure you've seen some of my other videos where I use very fast, loose brush strokes to create a grassy effect. In this case, I'm spending a little more time and effort and not necessarily painting every single grassy mark I see, but definitely way more than usual. When I have clusters of flowers that are a little bit farther away from me, those can be grouped together in bigger brush strokes. It's more about creating a sense of color there than any particular shape. But when I get closer to the foreground where my focus will be, I'm going to individually paint each flower. It takes a lot of patience to paint this way, and I actually divided my painting sessions up among 3 or 4 days this week so that I'd never felt rushed or frustrated or bored. I was actually kind of excited each day knowing that whenever I could take a little break, I could go work on it for a little bit and then just stop whenever I felt it was getting to be too repetitive or, just wanted to have a little break. So this is what it looks like in real time. And now I'm going to speed it up to show how it really accumulates after a while. All of these tiny individual marks work together to create the whole. Once you do this a few times, you start to learn what color shifts help with creating a very subtle lighting effect within the cluster of leaves and flowers. If it's your first time, you might as well just simplify everything just to get through the process. And then the next time you do it, try to add a little more variety of color. When painting the more detailed flowers in the foreground, I find that it helps to start with a darker version of whatever the final color will be. So these are some bright pink flowers. I'm going to start with a quinacridone magenta, maybe even mix in a little burnt umber. And then in the final layer, I'll do a more saturated version of the quinacridone. I might even mix in some opera pink and some white. And once again, I want to make sure I'm not spreading out the flowers in a way that creates a noticeable pattern or like a polka dot effect. Here and there, I'll put tiny ones, then some big ones. Sometimes I'll cluster a couple together. Just giving it that variety really helps. My final piece of advice deviates slightly from the overall topic of realism, but I think it's really important because it affects the final look of my paintings in particular. And that is, I will often paint what I want, not what I see all the time, especially when it comes to color. So I mentioned earlier that I like to stylize my colors, give it a little whimsy, a little fantasy, and a lot of times that means I'm touching in colors I don't actually see in person. Or maybe I see a version of the color and then I exaggerate it in my painting. Very often in Scotland, we have very blue, almost purple mountain in the distance because of the atmosphere. And I love how that looks in comparison to the bright greens in the foreground. And I'm not here to direct you towards any particular styles or color choices or anything. But one thing I think helps is to understand why you like certain colors together. And that comes with practice, trying them in a painting. And then also it comes with trusting your vision. So if you love a more fantastical or whimsical look, go ahead and use those purples or those pinks or those turquoises. Learning how to mix your greens in particular can really help because oftentimes the greens we get straight out of the tube are incredibly highly saturated, and that alone can be very distracting in a painting. By using a limited set of colors, I was able to mix anything I needed, and that also helped the whole painting, all of the colors, all of the variety, stay harmonized. When everything is mixed from the same few colors, they play together nicely, whereas if you're using a set of 24 colors and you're just picking and choosing as you go, it can sometimes create a sense of discord in the colors, or it can even feel a little muddy or flat. So I guess I'm just going to repeat myself again for the millionth time, and that is to start practicing your color mixing. Start with swatches, keep it simple, and then slowly start mixing and using that in a painting. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap this video up here. I hope you got something useful out of it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to help support my channel, leaving a comment really helps, and also sharing the video with your friends. I'd love to know if there are any particular colors that you find yourself using in every painting. You're just obsessed with them. I definitely lean into the turquoise and the lilac quite often. But yeah, it's always interesting to hear what other people are into in their paintings. All right, I'm going to head out now. I hope you're all enjoying your summer, and I will see you all next time. Take care.